The market was full of noise, laughter, and the smell of roasted food. Merchants shouted about their goods, families carried baskets, and children ran between the stalls. But in the middle of all this life, a small alien girl crouched near the edge of the road. Her skin was pale, her clothes nothing more than torn rags, her ribs pressing against her chest. She watched the food, but did not move closer. She knew if she stretched her hand, someone would slap it away. Her people had long ago decided she was worthless. She was the orphan no one wanted, the cursed one they laughed at. They had even given her a cruel name, Dirt, because they said that was all she was worth. When she tried to work, they pushed her out. When she tried to beg, they spat at her. And when she tried to eat from the garbage, they laughed and cheered. Every day was a fight, not for life, but for the right to be seen as alive. That morning, her stomach burned, twisting in pain. Her eyes followed a boy chewing a piece of bread. He dropped the crust on the ground, and the dogs ran for it. She ran too, falling to her knees, trying to grab the smallest piece. The crowd saw her. Instead of pity, they shouted, "Look, Dirt fights the dogs again." They laughed as the animals snapped at her thin arms. One dog bit her hand. She cried out, but still clutched the food close. The bread was crushed and filthy, yet to her it was gold. She stuffed it into her mouth. Ignoring the blood on her fingers, the people clapped as if this was entertainment. To them, her suffering was a game, a way to pass the dull hours of the day. But in that crowd, there was one who did not laugh. A human man standing taller than Tob. A human man standing taller than most, his eyes fixed on her. He did not understand their cruelty on earth. Even a stray animal would be given more care than this child. Yet here, they treated her worse than an insect. The girl saw him watching, and fear tightened her chest. If he shouted at her too, she did not know if she had strength left to run. But he did not shout. He only frowned, and his fists clenched. At his sides, she turned her face away and crawled back into the shadow of a broken wall. She licked her bloody fingers, tasting dirt and salt. The bread was gone too quickly, leaving her stomach still empty, but her shame lasted longer. The sound of their laughter echoed in her ears like knives. As the sun sank lower, the air grew cold. The girl curled up under the broken wall. Pulling her thin rags tight, her stomach hurt, but her heart hurt more. How long could she keep living? Like this, maybe tomorrow she would not wake up. Maybe tomorrow the hunger would finally win. But before she closed her eyes, she looked once more at the human. He was still there, standing at the edge of the crowd. He looked at her with something she had not seen in years, not hate, not disgust, but sorrow. And though she did not know why, her chest felt warm for a moment. The villagers whispered about him as they walked away. "Why is he staring at dirt?" one muttered. "Humans are strange. Maybe he thinks she is worth something." Another laughed. Their voices faded as night fell. The girl lay still, weak and forgotten, but somewhere deep inside, a fragile spark lit up. Because for the first time in so long, someone had not laughed. At her pain, the stars came out, cold and distant above the settlement. The wind blew dust across the empty road. The girl's eyes closed, her body shivering. She thought maybe she would not open them again, but the memory of the human's gaze stayed with her. It was not much, but for her, it was enough to hope for one more day. The next morning, the market was busy again. Voices rose in laughter, merchants shouted, and the smell of hot food filled the air. The starving girl, still weak from yesterday, dragged herself back to the square. Her body ached, but hunger pushed her forward. She saw a basket of fruit slip from a merchant's cart. One round fruit rolled across the dirt, stopping close to her feet. Her heart raced as she bent down, her hand trembling. Maybe this time, no one would see. Maybe she could take just one bite before anyone noticed, but before she could lift it, A sharp voice cut through the air. "Dirt again," the merchant sneered, "stealing from honest folk." The crowd turned their heads, and laughter followed. Some shouted insults, some picked up stones. The girl froze, clutching the fruit to her chest. A man from the crowd stepped forward and slapped the fruit away. It rolled back into the dust, crushed under his boot. The girl's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her mouth was dry, her throat empty, her eyes filled with tears. But the crowd only laughed harder. "Make her dance for it." One woman called. "Yes," another man said. "Let's see how far dirt will go for a bite." They circled her, voices rising like cruel music. Some clapped their hands, others stomped their feet. The girl's legs shook, her chest rose, and fell with quick breaths, and then someone threw half a crust of bread at her feet. It landed in the dirt, broken and dusty. The crowd cheered, waiting to see what she would do. Her stomach twisted so badly she thought she would faint. She dropped to her knees, reaching for it. But as her fingers touched the crust, a boy snatched it away and waved it in front of her face. "Beg, dirt," he said with a grin. "Beg like the dog you are." The people laughed until their voices echoed off the walls. The girl's cheeks burned with shame, but she lowered her head. If she begged, maybe she could eat. "Please," she whispered, her voice thin. The boy laughed and threw the bread into the dirt again. She crawled forward. But another child kicked it further away. They tossed it back and forth. A cruel game with her hunger. The girl chased it, her hands scraping the ground, her knees bleeding. Then suddenly, a shadow fell across the square. The laughter slowed, then stopped. The bread landed near a pair of heavy boots. The girl looked up and saw him again. The human. He bent down and picked up the crust. The crowd went silent, waiting to see what he would do. Would he join their game? Would he mock her too, instead? He brushed the dirt off and held it out to her. His hand was steady, his eyes calm. The girl stared, not believing. No one had ever done this before. She looked at the bread, then at his face, for a moment. The world around her faded, the shouting, the mocking, all disappeared. But then a loud voice broke the silence. "She does not deserve food," the merchant barked. "Do not waste it on dirt." Human. Others joined in, shouting and jeering. "She is cursed," one said. "She brings nothing but shame." Another called. The human did not move. His jaw tightened, his eyes sharp as steel. Slowly, he knelt down until he was level with her. "Take it," he said softly, his voice strong enough for all to hear. The girl hesitated, her small hands trembling. Then she reached out and took the crust, holding it close like treasure. The crowd erupted in anger. Some shouted that the human was foolish. Others warned he would regret helping her. But none dared step forward. Something in his stance held them back. A quiet strength they could not mock. The girl pressed the crust to her lips, tasting dirt and bread. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Not from the hunger, but from the shock of kindness. The human did not laugh. He did not look away for the first time. Someone had seen her as more than dirt. He had seen her as alive when the crowd finally scattered, muttering their curses. The girl stayed kneeling. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. The human watched, then turned and began to walk away. But before he disappeared into the crowd, he glanced back at her. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, and she felt something spark inside her chest. It was not hope, not yet, but it was something. Close, and for a starving girl who had been treated like dirt, that was more than enough. Night fell over the village, and the streets grew quiet. Shadows stretched long across the ground, the air cold and sharp. The little alien girl sat curled in the corner of a ruined wall, her arms wrapped tight around her thin body. Her stomach growled, though she had eaten the crust of bread the human gave her. It had not been enough, but it was more than she usually had. she could not stop thinking about him, the way he had knelt down and given her food. The way his eyes held no laughter, no cruelty, only strength and pity. For a moment, she had felt safe under his gaze, and that feeling would not leave her. No matter how hard she tried, as the stars shone above, the girl grew weaker. Her body shook from the cold, and her eyes burned with tears. She knew she could not survive many more nights like this, but she also knew she had nowhere to go. No one wanted her, no one but maybe him. Her legs trembled as she forced herself to stand. Step by step, she moved through the quiet streets. Her heart raced, each sound making her flinch. She feared being seen, feared the mocking voices, feared the stones. But still, she walked, drawn toward the small cabin where the human stayed. When she reached his door, she stopped. Her breath came quick, her chest tight with fear. Her hand lifted, ready to knock. But she froze. What if he was like the others? What if today's kindness was only pity? What if he threw her out, or worse, laughed at her too? Her eyes filled with tears, and her hand dropped back to her side. She wanted to turn and run, but her legs would not move. So she sank down against the wall by his door, her body shaking from hunger and cold. And there she waited, too weak to try again. Inside, the human sat at a small table, a dim light burning above him. He had little food, only a small meal he had saved from earlier. But as he lifted the spoon, he thought of her. The starving girl with hollow eyes. The memory of her thin arms fighting dogs for scraps haunted him. The way she clutched the bread as if it were treasure burned in his mind. He set the spoon down, sighing. He could not ignore her. Not tonight, not after what he had seen. Something about her had touched him, a spark of humanity in a place that had forgotten compassion. So he stood, walking toward the door, when he opened it. The night air rushed in, and there she was. The girl lay curled at his doorstep, her body still, her lips pale. For a terrible moment, he thought she was gone, but then her eyes fluttered. Open, weak, and frightened, she gasped softly, as if caught doing something wrong. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "I am sorry," she said. "I will leave," but the human crouched beside her, his face calm. "No," he said firmly. "You will not leave." He lifted her gently into his arms. Her small frame light as air. She trembled, not from the cold alone, but from disbelief. No one had ever carried her. No one had ever wanted her near. Inside, he set her by the fire and placed a blanket over her shoulders. The warmth made her shiver harder at first, her body not used to it. He poured water into a cup and held it to her lips. She drank slowly, her hands clutching the cup as though it might vanish. Then he gave her a piece of bread from his own meal. Her eyes widened, and she hesitated. "Eat," he said gently. "It is yours." She bit into it, tears running down her face. The bread was soft, warm. Unlike the scraps she usually fought for, she ate slowly, afraid it might be a dream. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Why? Why are you kind to me?" The human looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because you are alive, and that is reason enough." The words felt heavy, powerful, something she had never heard before. "Alive," he had said, as if she mattered, as if she was more than dirt. The girl pressed the bread to her chest, her body trembling. No one had ever spoken to her like that. She wanted to thank him, but her throat closed with emotion, so she only nodded, tears shining in her eyes. That night, for the first time in her life, she slept with warmth on her skin and food in her belly. The human kept watch by the fire, his face thoughtful and strong. He knew the village would not like this. They had already mocked her, already hated her, and by taking her in, he had made himself a target too. But as he looked at her small sleeping form, he did not regret it. He had made his choice. And in the silence of the night, the invitation was sealed not with words, but with action. From this moment forward, she was no longer alone. Morning light spilled over the village. The human's small cabin stood quietly at the edge, smoke rising gently from its chimney. Inside, the girl opened her eyes. Warmth still around her from the blanket he had given. For the first time in her life, she had not woken up cold. Her stomach still ached from hunger, but she had eaten, and that made her stronger than yesterday. She sat up slowly, looking around. The human was already awake, sitting by the table, sharpening a tool with calm focus. When she shifted, his eyes lifted, and for a moment she froze, but he only gave a small nod, as if to say she was safe here. Her lips trembled, and she whispered, "Thank you," though her voice was barely audible. He stood and placed another piece of bread in front of her. "Eat," he said, his tone firm but kind. She hesitated, glancing at the door. "What if they see?" she whispered, fear rising again. The human frowned slightly. "Let them see," he answered. "You are here now." Outside, the village was already awake. Word had spread faster than fire. The human had taken dirt into his home. Every corner buzzed with whispers. Some laughed, some scowled. Some shook their heads in disbelief. "Why him?" a merchant muttered. "Why waste time on the cursed girl? He will regret it." Another woman said, "That child brings ruin." Children mocked in the streets, imitating her crawling, their voices cruel. The girl's name dirt was spat out more often than ever. By midday, a small group gathered near his cabin. They did not knock, only stood outside and whispered loudly, "Did you hear? He fed her." One sneered. "He even let her sleep under his roof." Another said, "Humans are strange. Maybe he thinks she is worth something." A third laughed. The girl sat by the window, her body tense, her hands gripping the bread tightly. She could hear them, every word stabbing into her like knives. Her chest ached, and she wanted to run, to escape before the human grew tired of her too. But when she looked at him, he was calm, sharpening his blade, as if their words did not matter. Finally, he stood and opened the door. The villager stepped back slightly, surprised. His gaze swept over them, hard and steady. "She stays," he said simply, his voice like stone. The whispers stopped for a moment, shock spreading across their faces. "She is nothing," one man dared to say. "She will bring you nothing but trouble." "She is not nothing," the human answered, his tone sharp. "She is alive, and that is enough." The words struck the air heavy, so firm that no one dared reply. Slowly, the villagers drifted back, muttering, but none challenged him further. The girl sat frozen inside, her eyes wide. No one had ever spoken for her before. No one had ever defended her. Her heart pounded, and tears blurred her vision when the human returned and closed the door. She whispered, "Why do you fight for me?" He looked at her, then simply said, "Because you deserve to live." The words broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pressed her face into her hands. For so long, she had believed she was worthless, less than dirt, but here was someone who saw her as more, and she did not know how to hold the weight of that kindness. As the day passed, the whispers did not stop. Everywhere in the village, voices carried her name, some with disgust, some with laughter, some with warnings. But in the small cabin, the human gave her food, warmth, and silence. And in that silence, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was not what they said at sunset. She sat outside with him, watching the sky turn red. Children pointed at her from a distance, laughing and shouting insults. Her body tensed, ready to run inside. But the human shook his head. "Stay," he said, his voice steady. "Don't hide." She swallowed hard, her small hands trembling, but she stayed. The laughter stung, but sitting beside him gave her courage. The whispers of the village grew stronger that night. They gathered in homes, muttering about the human's choice. Some said he was mad. Others said he was dangerous. The leaders began to discuss what to do. Humans should not interfere with our kind. One said, if he keeps the cursed girl, it will bring shame on us all. Another warned, but inside the cabin, the girl slept by the fire once more. The human sat awake, listening to the distant voices in the dark. He knew they were planning. He knew they would not stop. Yet, when he looked at the girl's small frame curled in the blanket, his resolve hardened. Whatever storm the village brought, he would face it, because she was no longer just dirt to him. She was a child worth saving, a life worth defending, and no amount of whispering would change that. The days that followed were heavy with whispers. The village no longer hid their anger. They spoke it loudly, letting the words drift to the human's cabin. Throw her out, they said. She is cursed. She is dirt. She does not belong. Under a roof, others muttered, and soon. The talk was not just whispers, but orders from the village leaders. One morning, 3 elders came to his door. They stood tall, wrapped in dark cloaks, their faces sharp with disapproval. The girl hid behind the human, her thin hands clutching his sleeve. Her body shook, not from cold, but from fear. She knew what they had come for. The eldest spoke first, his voice low and commanding. Human, you must surrender her to us, he said. She is a burden to this village and a danger to you. The human's eyes narrowed, but he did not step aside. She is a child, he answered. Not a danger. She is dirt. The elder spat. You defy our customs by keeping her. The girl pressed her face into the human's side, tears filling her eyes. Every word reminded her of what she had always been told: she was nothing. She waited for him to give in, to hand her over. That was what everyone always did. But he did not. Instead, his voice grew harder, sharper than steel. No, he said firmly. I will not surrender her. The elders shifted uncomfortably, unused to such defiance. One leaned forward, his eyes narrow. Then you will suffer the price, he warned. The human did not flinch. Then I will pay it, he answered. The elders left, their cloaks sweeping the dirt. But their promise hung heavy in the air. The girl's heart pounded, and when the door shut, she whispered, Why? Why did you say no? He looked down at her, his expression calm. Because you are not theirs to throw away, he said. You are mine to protect. Those words cut deeper than anything she had ever heard. Her chest tightened, warmth spreading. Through her broken heart, no one had ever claimed her before. No one had ever wanted her. Yet here was this human, standing against an entire village for her sake. The price of defiance came swiftly by evening. The market refused him trade. Merchants turned their backs when he approached. When he placed coins on the counter, they pushed them back. We will not sell to someone who keeps dirt, they said with sneers. Food became harder to find. The human supplies ran low, and he often gave most of it to the girl, she noticed, watching the way he quietly pushed his portion to her plate. At night, her stomach ached less, but she saw his eyes grow tired, his frame thinner. Her guilt grew heavier with each passing day. One night by the fire, she whispered, I should leave. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. If I go, they will stop hurting you. The human looked at her sharply, his eyes burning. You will not leave, he said. If they wish to starve me, let them, but you stay. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she nodded, unable to argue. The villagers did not stop with food. They began to shout at him in the streets. Foolish human, they mocked. You waste your strength on dirt. Children threw stones at the cabin when night fell, their laughter cruel. But every time the humans stood at the door, silent and unshaken. Until they ran away, inside, the girl's fear turned into something else. A spark she had never felt before, watching him endure hunger and insults for her sake, lit a flame deep inside. She realized she was no longer just surviving. She was being defended, valued, even loved. But love came with pain. She saw him grow weary, saw the lines on his face deepen. Her heart hurt more than her hunger ever had. At night, while he slept, she whispered to herself, "I will not let him suffer because of me." The price of defiance weighed on them both. The village had made their stance clear. She was not welcome, and neither was he now. But every time she thought about leaving, his words echoed in her mind. "You are not theirs to throw away. You are mine to protect." Those words were chains stronger than iron, binding her to him one evening. As the sun sank red over the rooftops, the elders gathered again in the square. Their voices carried through the air, loud enough for all to hear. "This cannot continue," one declared. "The human defies us. He keeps what should be cast out." The crowd cheered their anger, their hatred boiling. "We will end this," they shouted. Before the shame spreads further, the girl sat inside the cabin, trembling, her eyes wide with fear. The human placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and calm. "They will come soon," he said softly, "but I will be ready." She clutched his hand, her voice breaking. "They will hurt you." He looked at her, and for the first time, a small smile touched his lips. "Then let them try," he whispered. The days grew harder. The village had cut them off completely. No merchant would sell to the human. No neighbor would share a single grain. When he walked through the market, people turned their backs. When he placed coins on a table, they were pushed away as if his money carried disease. The girl saw it all. She saw the way his shoulders stiffened when he returned home with empty hands. She saw the way he gave her the last of the bread while pretending he wasn't hungry. At night, when his stomach growled louder than hers, he only smiled and said, "I am fine." But she knew he was not fine. Inside the cabin, food became scarce. Meals grew smaller each day, until sometimes there was nothing but water to drink. The girl wanted to give her share back, but he would not allow it. "Eat," he told her, his voice firm. "You need it." More, her heart ached, knowing he was choosing hunger for her sake. The whispers outside grew crueler. "They will starve soon," villagers said. "And then the human will learn his mistake." Children sang mocking songs outside the cabin, calling her dirt, calling him a fool. Each word was like a knife. But the girl stayed silent because she could not bear to make his burden heavier. One evening, as the fire burned low, the girl sat staring at him. His face was thinner, his eyes tired, yet still he worked. Fixing tools with steady hands, she whispered softly, "Why do you suffer for me?" He looked at her, his gaze steady. "Because you are worth it," he said. Her throat tightened, tears filling her eyes. "But I am nothing," she whispered. He shook his head firmly. "You are not nothing. You are alive, and you are mine to protect." The words filled her with warmth and pain at the same time. No one had ever spoken like that. No one had ever chosen her before. She wanted to believe him, yet the hunger pressed. Heavy in her chest, that night, when he finally slept, she lay awake, her eyes staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with guilt. She thought of slipping away if she left. The village would leave him alone. He could eat, he could live. Her small body shook as she imagined walking into the cold night, vanishing into the dark. But then she remembered his words. "You are not theirs to throw away." Her heart clenched, and she could not move. Even if leaving saved him, it would break the promise he had given her. The next morning, she found him outside, chopping wood, though his hands were weak. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I want to help." He looked at her, surprised, then shook his head. "You are too small," he said, "too weak. but she clenched her fists. "I do not want to be useless anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. For a long moment, he was silent. Then he nodded slowly. "Then you will learn." So he taught her how to gather branches in the forest, how to carry water, how to light the fire. Her hands blistered, her feet bled, but she did not stop. Every task she did made her feel stronger, not just in body, but in spirit, for the first time. She felt she was not only surviving, but fighting back. The hunger did not disappear. Some nights, they still went to bed with nothing but water. But the girl noticed something new. He no longer looked at her as fragile. He began to trust her with small tasks, began to see her as more than a starving child. And that trust gave her hope. The villagers noticed too. They saw her walking beside him, carrying wood. Standing tall, despite her thin frame, whispers followed them like shadows. "Why does she try? She will always be dirt." Some scoffed, but others watched in silence, their laughter not as quick. As before, still, the leaders grew angrier. They had hoped hunger would break them, drive the girl out. Instead, she stayed, and the human refused to bend. So they planned something harsher, something final. One evening, a group of men approached the cabin, their faces grim. The girl's heart pounded as she heard their voices outside. "This ends tonight," one growled. "The human cannot keep defying us." She trembled, clutching the human's arm. "They will hurt you," she whispered. He placed his hand over hers, steady and calm. "Let them try," he said. The same words he had spoken before, as the men gathered their courage, torches in hand. The girl realized something deep in her heart. The trial of hunger had not broken her. It had changed her. She was no longer just dirt, no longer just a starving girl crawling for scraps. She was someone worth fighting for, someone who now carried the human strength inside her. And as the sound of footsteps grew louder, she knew the real battle was only beginning. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the crackle of torches outside the cabin. The girl sat trembling by the fire, clutching the blanket tight around her thin shoulders. Her wide eyes stared at the door as shadows moved across the window. The human stood tall, his back straight, his jaw set like stone. He did not move from the doorway, his body a shield between her and the world. Voices rose from outside, harsh and angry. "Enough." One man shouted, "You have defied. US too long, she is cursed." Another spat. "And if you will not throw her out, then we will drag her out ourselves." The girl whimpered softly, pressing her face into her hands. Her body shook with fear, but deep inside, something else stirred, something that had grown through hunger and kindness. The human opened the door slowly, stepping into the night. The crowd flinched at his calmness, for they had expected shouting, anger, fear, but he was silent, his eyes sweeping over them. Torches burned in the hands of the men, their faces twisted with hate behind them. Villagers watched from a distance, children clinging to their mothers. "She stays," the human said at last, his voice steady. The crowd roared in fury. "You do not command us," one shouted. "This is our law, our custom. She is dirt." Another screamed. "Worthless, cursed, nothing." The human's jaw tightened, his eyes burned. "She is not nothing," he answered, his voice ringing across the square. "She is a child, and she is alive." The words silenced them for a moment. The girl peeked from the doorway, her heart pounding. She had heard many words in her short life, cruel ones, sharp ones, but never these. No one had ever called her a child before. No one had ever spoken of her life as if it mattered. "She will bring ruin on us all," one elder barked, stepping forward. "You shame yourself, human, by protecting filth." The crowd muttered agreement, their anger swelling. Again. But the human took a step closer, his voice rising. You shame yourselves. He thundered. You laugh at hunger, you cheer at suffering, you call a child dirt, but it is you who are stained. The words struck like blows. Some villagers lowered their eyes, guilt flickering in their faces. Others clenched their fists, unwilling to listen. The girl's chest burned, her eyes filled with tears. This was not just his fight, was hers too. She stepped outside, her bare feet cold on the ground. The crowd gasped, some laughed, some sneered. Look, dirt hides behind him, someone shouted. But she raised her small voice, trembling but clear. I am not dirt, she said, her voice cracking. I am alive. The crowd froze. The torches crackling in the still air, her words echoed, fragile yet stronger than any insult. For the first time, she looked at them without lowering her eyes. For the first time, she stood beside someone instead of crawling at their feet. The human placed his hand on her shoulder, steady and proud. You hear her, he said. His voice, low but powerful. She is alive, and she stays with me. The crowd shifted uneasily, their anger clashing with doubt. Some whispered, some turned away, their certainty broken. One elder stepped forward, his face dark with rage. If you defy us again, human, you will no longer be welcome here. The human's lips curved into a cold smile. Then so be it, he said. I need no place among those who abandon children to starve. His words cut the air like a blade. The crowd wavered, their fury dimming, their courage shrinking. They had expected him to bend, to surrender. But instead he stood unbroken, and in his shadow, the girl stood too. Trembling but unyielding, slowly, one by one. The villagers drifted back into the night. Their torches faded, their voices quieted, until only silence remained. Heavy and deep, the girl's body sagged, her strength gone. But the human caught her before she fell. You are safe, he whispered. Carrying her inside, by the fire, she clung to him, tears spilling down her cheeks. They will hate you forever because of me. She sobbed. He looked down at her. His eyes calm, his voice steady. Let them hate, he said softly. I did not choose them. I chose you. The words struck her heart like light breaking through darkness. She buried her face against his chest, sobbing. Not from pain, but from something she had never felt before, being wanted, for the first time. She believed she was more than dirt. For the first time, she belonged to someone outside the village. Slept uneasily, haunted by the human's words, but inside the small cabin, the fire burned warm. A new life had begun. Not with wealth or power, but with defiance, kindness, and courage. The girl was no longer starving, no longer alone. And the human, though now an outcast, had given her something greater than food or shelter. He had given her an answer clear and unshakable. She was worth saving, and nothing in the galaxy could take that truth away.